Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. And in this episode for the new year, we're talking to the folks at Meet the Lab.
Meet the Lab is a learning media collection that introduces students to real-world issues, scientific practices and concepts, and also to the people that work together to research and solve problems using science.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel. We're in the new year, Dale.
Yes, I am excited, almost always excited for a new year, but let's face it, I think particularly this new year hopefully is going to be trending upward in happiness, I hope.
You know what I like about this year, and I think this actually started last year, but now I think we get to really experience it now, because we started this show in the aughts. And some of the semantics, this is what I'm thinking of. It's like, 09, 08, like, there's just not a good feel for that. Even, 17, 18. But now we can say, back in the 20s.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I know. We went through a period of like, what do we call
the
this?
20s, the 30s.
I did always feel uncomfortable with that. You know what's really weird, though?
We had to go through 20 years of that. Now we're here.
We're moving towards, like, I watched The Right Stuff over winter break.
The series? That's good, isn't it?
No, the actual movie.
The movie. Well, you have to watch the series, too.
I heard. I watched that, and that's talking about stuff in the 50s and then in the the era, and then talking about those. And you think about the 50s, like I've always heard about the 50s. If we're lucky, we're going to live in the 50s again, and it's going to be weird, right?
This is going to make us feel old, but you remember the 80s.
Yes,
that was 40 years ago.
I know. It is quite crazy. Anyways, so time when you're in the beginning of the year, you're always looking forward, looking at new things. I think that our podcast has had many of those opportunities to look towards the future and see what's going to come out of it and that kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to reaching out to new guests for the rest of this season. We're still in season 14. We do it in a school year calendar. So we have been starting this season with a bunch of, back in September, a bunch of just episodes about...
We started in August.
Yeah, we started in August talking about COVID and safety and things like that in the classroom. But then we did our video series, and now we're back on our...
Scientist Out
Loud series, and this episode is sort of it's almost like a melding of those two things, right? Because there's a little bit of video and there's a little bit of the topic of the video is Meet the Scientist.
And one of the really cool things about this, and we sometimes have to be careful about showcasing things right in our backyard, but this is coming out of Wisconsin.
Yeah. So if listeners don't know, of course, Brian and I are in Wisconsin, and we just... if anybody ever accuses us for doing, podcasts that are, biased or too close to home, we just got done with New Zealand. So that was the farthest we could go. So we counter that. Home. Yeah, we counter that with one that's a few miles away down in Madison.
But to that end, if you know of some fascinating, wonderful local science in your area too, reach out to us, and that might be a topic for a future show.
Agreed. But let's move to our guests. To learn more about Meet the Lab, we've welcomed two guests to our show to tell us all about it.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for having us a part of this. We're excited to be here. I'm Travis Tangen. I work down at the Discovery Building for WARF. So we're an affiliate of the UW-Madison campus, but really what I do in managing education programs there is help facilitate researchers' connection to the public. And what we're going to learn about together and talk about today is one example of that.
Okay. And Megan?
My name is Megan Monday. I'm executive producer at PBS Wisconsin in the Education Department, and I work with producers to create classroom media content for Wisconsin students and learners.
So we ran into this, I guess we call it a project called Meet the Lab on PBS Wisconsin. And, what's nice in the show is that we do get the breadth of what's out in the world and nationally. And sometimes we have to be a little bit careful about not being too biased about what we have within our own borders of our state in Wisconsin here. But we definitely have wonderful gems and jewels that we'd love to share with people. And this looks like one of those here. Was this designed, Meet the Lab, to be something that is supposed to be beyond Wisconsin, or is it more for students within Wisconsin?
Well, both Travis's organization and PBS Wisconsin, the primary focus of who we serve is the state. But as you said, a lot of the content in Meet the Lab has relevance that goes outside of the state, and it kind of connects to the whole Wisconsin idea, right? Where we can take the thoughts and the gems inside of our own locality and magnify or amplify them, or look for mirrors in other places as well.
Yeah, and I would even flip that on its that question over and look at the representations and where the origin of all the researchers are from. There's a lot of individuals that come to Wisconsin that are beyond the borders to connect to the great research enterprise that UW-Madison is. So you kind of have this two-way street of bringing people from outside Wisconsin to UW-Madison, and they're helping to help our state of Wisconsin, but certainly connecting back beyond the borders.
And if you forget about that, one of the splash images that comes across on the website is a woman walking by a house in front of snow. And so, yes, we are in Wisconsin. We're coming into the winter months here. But tell us a little bit about Meet the Lab. What is it? What does it provide? And how did it get its start?
Yeah.
All right. So Meet the Lab is a classroom media resource, and it's designed for middle school students, 6th through 8th grade. It can be used, above and below, but that's sort of the core of our focus. And it's a variety of different media pieces. It has videos. It has an interactive component to it with these cards that flip on the bottom of the website, and it has a student activity that is a slide deck. It's got it's an educator guide. So it has a variety of different media components, and each of them has a different focus. So you can access all of the materials individually. Also, you can kind of choose and play which one you want to use in the classroom, but they are also designed to take you on a bit of a journey. The sort of central thing that we start with every lab that we feature on Meet the Lab is a video designed to explore why the research of that lab matters. And to do that, we find someone who is affected by the lab's research, but doesn't necessarily have to have a connection exactly to the lab. It's someone who is affected. So, for example, in the optical microscopy and medicine lab, which is the SCALA lab that we featured, they use lasers and magnification to identify patterns of cancerous cell growth. And so we looked for someone who had the experience of dealing with cancer in their own lives. And then we shared that story. So we're looking for ways that it's sort of the real world phenomena told in a way that a student can connect to. We also look for stories that are kind of a near peer to that middle school age, so that students can see themselves in the video. So we start with that, and it's sort of like a documentary short piece. And it's really just meant to be a spark, like the initial introduction to why it's important to focus on this lab and the cutting edge research that they do. Once you have that introduction, you have the next media components are another video. This one's called Students Ask Scientists. Every lab is going to have this video, and it's where we take real questions from middle schoolers and we share those with the scientists, and they respond. So it's like a conversation where students get to lead with their own curiosity and ask their questions. Following that piece, there's an interactive activity that educators can use with their students. Right now, it takes the form of a slide deck, and you have a researcher from the lab that kind of introduces some science practices or concepts to students. And students can go through and do that activity alone or in groups. And then at the end of the journey, the media journey, you'll get to these cards which introduce you to the scientists. And you've met these scientists already, actually, because they're the ones in the video answering the questions. They're the ones in the slide deck. But the cards themselves introduce students, and they tell them kind of who they are and what they do. But then they answer a variety of kind of fun questions, like, what's the weirdest thing I love, or what's my secret superpower? And students have an opportunity to kind of reflect on themselves and the scientists and see who they relate to. And there's a couple different activities that are meant to be done in groups to kind of reinforce that identification with scientists.
Okay. And I just kind of looked through the slideshow while you were talking there, and for people who are questioning whether or not how can I access this, you do have the option of doing it right on the website or downloading a PowerPoint or a Google slideshow. Mm-hmm. Is that designed for the teacher to deliver or for students to access independently?
The page where you can access all of these videos and the slide deck, that's meant to be student facing. So the student can go on their own. It does have a download function because not all of our areas in Wisconsin have enough consistent access to be able to have all the students on the site. So you can download it. And the component that I didn't talk about much, but Travis, maybe you could, is the educator guide.
Yeah, sure. Just kind of imagining that use case of how this would interact in the classroom. The visioning was really to be student driven. That teacher is the activator and the kids are sparking and working together. Those are some of the imaginative pieces that we use to look at how that classroom would operate. So the slide deck resources are very reduced to paper and pencil style interactive things within that slide deck, but there's such rich prompts of discussion, and they're real images from the scientist lab. So you're, in sense, working along with that researcher. That's the hope that we have, that the youth will have this validity of process because you're doing and coming along for a ride with the same kind of tools and data and pattern recognition that the researcher is doing. So we're hopeful that exists in a classroom the same way it exists in a lab. People talking and trying to figure things out.
Okay. You have two labs out there right now. There's a Tiny Earth lab and the optical microscopy lab. What are your plans to expand in the future? What are we going to see next?
Yeah, it's really, Megan, and maybe you can take this next step, but the one picture that was painted that eventually this will look like a Netflix screen, right? And you have all your different labs and categories and things like that. So with that kind of visioning piece, who's on deck here, Megan?
Well,
you don't even have to tell us, like, you could maybe give us a discipline. Like, do we have physics up or chemistry coming in?
Yeah, we have stem cells next, regenerative biology. So right now in production is Ashton Lab. And actually, the original plan was for the project to launch last month with 4 labs, but COVID slowed down our production a little bit. But we do have labs coming, 2 more in development right now that should be ready to launch in February. And so that's going to sort of diversify the disciplines as well as the people that you see represented in the media. And that's another important part to this project, is to have a range of seeing different people doing science and different people working together.
And one cool thing to kind of think about, what does the Ashton Lab do? They engineer with living things. So they engineer with stem cells and processes to support their growth. And they're developing organoids that you can use to test out neurodegenerative disorders or injuries to better understand what's happening when something goes wrong, or how do you make things go in the right direction. So they're trying to develop an efficient model and process using engineering with living cells, and the patterns that emerged in their successes and things that didn't go well that influenced those next steps will be part of the activities that will be in the next Meet the Lab for the Ashton Lab.
So as you're putting these together, you probably have been thinking about science standards and obviously we hear a lot of need for integrating the science standards in there, and you're using terms like, of course, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math there. How do those two pieces, NGSS and STEAM, factor into building the labs?
Yeah, in terms of having some advice, we certainly had connections at the origin of the project to learn from educators, as well as individuals that were steeped in next generation science standards. I'm lucky enough.
I see you have teacher advisors in here.
Exactly. So the teacher advisors were critical. Again, if we're creating something for somebody, that's not going to work. We want to create with individuals so that it's, that idea of co-creation, we can point back to where that's going well, and that will hopefully end up in a better end product that, are informed by and with educators. So those individuals helped out a bunch. I'm lucky enough to be a lifelong learner and an educator in a lot of different contexts. So I took some of that personal experience of working within the standards in formal education, and then this networking to STEM ecosystems and how classrooms connect to community as part of that transition. And you'll see it most represented in pattern recognition activities and the scientific practices. So the scientific practices are key elements of how that lab exists, and you can see what a scientist does, and you'll be asked to participate in science in that same way.
So as Travis mentioned, we connected with educators at the beginning of the projects when we were working on the concept, as well as with we consulted with people from DPI and identified kind of the what we wanted to hone in on. Science practices. The one that we are engaging right now is, as Travis mentioned, is pattern recognition, and that's happening within the activity itself. But there's also modeling, which is in the educator guide, which has a lot of additional ways to extend the learning from the media itself. So NGSS is sort of what kind of centered those additional extension activities.
Mm-hmm. And as an easy example of a cross-cutting concept, engineering with biology with stem cells, that's the normal process of this lab. So it's just a representation of what you would call in the classroom a performance assessment, except for the performance assessment in this case is research. That's what these individuals are doing. And so you see that really in an obvious way, and you're asked to participate in that same thing as a student, as a learner, as a scientist, as an engineer.
Fantastic.
Right.
We've been doing I'm sorry, go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to say that you also asked about STEAM identity and developing STEAM identity. It's a really big part of this project. And we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to have that as a focus. And for us, that was having students think about who they think they are, who they can be, and how they belong in the context of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And the way that we approached that primarily was, one, to center student voice, to have students, to show students asking questions in some of the videos so they can see expressions of their peers. Another one is, I mentioned there's this card activity at the bottom where they can relate to people in the field and see themselves. And, access to fields and careers can be highly relational. So, for example, a student that has an uncle in bioengineering has the point of access that another student may not. So the concept of creating those cards was to introduce students to scientists. That came from a desire to kind of level the playing field of that access in a little tiny way. And so students can see themselves in that. And we know that once they do that, then they have more probability to go into those fields or to use those practices in their lives.
Yeah, I like how you frame the term STEAM identity there. We often hear about STEAM learning as if it's its own little category, but of course we have students who are trying to identify with these scientists and with these professions there. That's one of the things that we've been doing in the last couple of years at Lab Out Loud with our Scientist Out Loud series, and we're connecting directly with scientists, talking about what they do, why it's important, and often the path of how they got to where they are. And it almost always reveals a surprise in terms of what they're working on, or they were never interested in this path, but then something triggered inside of themselves that now they're investigating baboon poop, and now they're going to the bottom of the seafloor and collecting sediment, and very often it's never a straight line path. It's kind of got twists and turns there. Did you see any of that as you were connecting with scientists, or anything that was surprised you going into this project?
I think, I see that every moment of my day. The journey, the nonlinear journey, I was ready to say that because it's such an artificial representation that you sometimes see of who's a scientist. You see their degrees, and then you see their famous project, and that's the way people think about a scientist or engineer or computer scientist. But what we know is they're people. So when you look at Meet the Lab, you'll see smiles, you'll see interactions and reflective connections, and you'll see that, as you said, researching baboon poop wasn't a goal in 5th grade, and they followed this pathway through to get there. Well, there was an opportunity that happened, an influence, a mentor, a random event sometimes that you don't anticipate, moving to a new location. And those stories are part of seeing yourselves as moving in that pathway, academic career, and even just within your leisure and understanding of science in your life. So if you can peek at and see that representation of somebody that's having a good time, and then also you'll see in the Meet the Lab video, the science practices, what scientists do. They're representing the fact that they are trying to answer questions. They don't have answers. Their whole pursuit is to answer a question, and they don't know the answer. And I think that's kind of a wonderful thing that people can reflect on STEAM identity, about creativity and curiosity to pursue that answer. And there's a lot of connections in the Meet the Lab projects that you're going to see that.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Travis and Megan. This was we saw this and we knew we had to connect with someone and see what it's all about, and look forward to seeing more labs unfold in the future.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with educators and with students, and just always want to know, let them know that there's an open door for collaboration and interaction and good idea sharing. So that's how things get done, is that little extra effort, that energy of activation. So if somebody has a little bit of extra energy after the day, please reach out.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.